When it comes to the redoing of a video game, I'd like to think there's four main categories. We got the remake, which is essentially from the ground up, a game being remade using the source game as its inspirational material to recreate the experiences from the first game, but with better tech. There's the remaster, where underneath everything, it's the same game as before, but everything looks nicer, and maybe some mechanics are tightened up, but it's still essentially the same game. And then there's the re-release, where a game that previously was released is pretty much in mostly the same form, just like re-released. Sometimes there's like some small things, like it's an HD now rather than standard definition, or other times it includes the DLC, but it's still the same game. And then there's the straight-on reboot, which is where they take the name of the original game and maybe some elements, gameplay or story elements from the original, and they do something completely new to kind of start the series off fresh. And over the years and continuously into the future, it seems like these four categories of redoings of games are used a lot, and sometimes they're stupider than other times. One of my least favorite examples of this is Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary, released in 2011 for the Xbox 360. Now, Halo 2 Anniversary, actually not bad. Amazing cutscenes that are pre-rendered, graphical enhancements that are very clearly derived from the original, but, you know, brought into what was then a modern-day standard of 2014, which still looks really great by 2025 standards. A toggle to go back to the old graphics instantly, but you still have the better performance with the higher frame rate. The original Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary from 2011, though, wasn't that at all. A lot of people don't actually remember how bad of a remaster this game was, especially because most people have experienced this game through the Master Chief Collection, which made some refinements to make it a bit better, but originally on the 360, it really wasn't that good. This was 343 Industries' first official game project, but they actually didn't develop much of the game. They brought in third-party studios to do all of the heavy lifting, and I'll be honest, just Combat Evolved Anniversary doesn't do any justice to the original art and design from the first Halo game. Like, that game was iconic for 2001 in just how it built this new ring world experience, the atmosphere. So many things about it were so visually pleasing, and it seemed like when it came to Combat Evolved Anniversary, they were just trying to like make a game that looked quote unquote more modern, but they kind of ignored a lot of the main core visuals that had made the first Combat Evolved so atmospheric. Like, let's talk about the second level, Halo, which was like a big deal back in the day. I loved this aesthetic design for how this level looked because you definitely feel like you're off Earth. You see this giant ring in the skybox that wraps around, and it's so vivid and clear. And the time of day is interesting because you see stars like it's nighttime, but it's still lit because you're not, you know, on Earth. You're in this different place. So the rules of how the sunlight would reach the surface would be different. And this whole like simple skybox design philosophy was just thrown out completely in Combat Evolved Anniversary. And that's just like one example. There's so many examples of things just being weird. Like on Pillar of Autumn, why are there all these like, what are these? Yellow hydraulic things? Like, why are they there? What purpose do they serve? I don't know. I really like the old tuba trails better than the new tuba trails. Like, look at the snow. Guilty Spark completely changes the atmosphere altogether. It's this like well-lit area, which was made intentionally, I guess, to make it easier to not get lost, but it kind of killed a lot of the vibe of this old, like swampy, mysterious jungle that you're trying to walk through. The library had some changes too. These ones weren't as bad to kind of like make it a little bit easier to navigate, so they were maybe onto something here. There'd also be times where like sometimes the geometry and the textures in the remaster didn't line up with the original geometry, so you'd be like hitting walls that you couldn't even see when you were trying to shoot at an enemy. There's definitely a lot of criticism with Combat Evolved Anniversary because of the fact that a lot of the game was reusing Halo Reach assets, which kind of made the game feel a little grungier and not as like colorful as the original. The whole graphics changing with the back button wasn't instant originally. You had to wait for it to like fade to black, then fade back in to have the graphics update. And then one of the biggest things about Combat Evolved back in the day that was so popular was the multiplayer. Like, LAN parties were so big on Xbox because people would take their Halos over to their friend's house and just like, you know, play that out, and it had no multiplayer. They just made a DLC pack for Halo Reach and called it a day, and that was that. It was lazy. Honestly, they could have just done a re-release of the game and maybe done like the whole like HD, maybe higher frame rate, and you know, they could even go as far as adding online to the game for the first time, which they would eventually do with MCC, but for the original release, this wasn't it. Okay, there's more games we have to talk about in just a second, but we got a sponsor, so let's pay some bills. Have you ever wished you could block annoying ads and get paid for browsing? With Pi, that's pi.org, you can. Pi is a browser extension that lets you block ads and earn money in different ways. Fair ads, where you get paid just by seeing certain ads. Instant rewards, where you click on limited Pi-approved ads and earn instantly. Here's how it works. Install Pi, visit your favorite sites like Forbes, ESPN, or Amazon, and watch ads, boom, disappear, real time. Just hover over the Pi logo to see how many ads have been blocked and how much visual space you've saved. Trust me, once you see the difference, you'll never go back. But with 1 million users and thousands of 5-star reviews, Pi is changing the browsing game. So whether you're shopping, catching up on news, or searching Google, you're earning rewards while you do it. The best part, it's super easy to cash out once you hit 1,000 points. So it's kind of cool to get paid just for browsing, supporting brands you actually like. So what are you waiting for? Head to pi.org/rocketsloth, click add to Chrome, and pin the extension. Join millions already using Pi and start earning today. Now, when doing research on this video, I was surprised to actually find that a lot of people were kind of disappointed with Resident Evil 3, a game that I thought was actually deemed as a really great remake. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not the most familiar with the Resident Evil series. I've only played parts of a handful of games. Luke, on the other hand, has a lot more experience with the Resident Evil series. But correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, but I think the general consensus when it came to Resident Evil 3 was that it is a good Resident Evil game on its own, that's for sure, but as far as a remake of the original Resident Evil 3, it left a lot of key aspects of the game that gave it its unique charm out and kind of streamlined a lot of the gameplay. Of course, this is coming off of the heels of Resident Evil 2's remake, which was kind of universally acclaimed, where some people thought that that was one of the best remakes of a game ever made. It seems like there was actually quite a bit of cut content coming from the original Resident Evil 3 that didn't make its way into the remake, and the whole idea of the Nemesis kind of being this threat that would just loom and pop out of nowhere, which made it these like super spooky moments. Instead, it was kind of more of a scripted sequence, and there was just a lot in overall pacing that seemed to have been altered from the original game. Now, of course, some people could argue that the original game was kind of clunky in the way that it paced things out, and there were some parts that really did need to kind of be reworked to fit into a modern standard. But perhaps Resident Evil 3 kind of strayed very far away from the original Resident Evil 3, and I think that that is why fans of the original Resident Evil 3 were disappointed. Not to say that Resident Evil 3's remake is a bad game, because in its own right, it is a good game. It is a retelling, more or less, of the story of Resident Evil 3, but in a completely different experience, unlike previous Resident Evil games that tried to be a more true definition of a remake, like what we saw with Resident Evil 2, or even Resident Evil 1's older remake, which did look significantly better than the original Resident Evil, but at the same time, in comparison, Resident Evil 1's remake to Resident Evil 2's remake does look pretty dramatically different because of the amount of time that's passed between the games. So yeah, I think Resident Evil 3 kind of just is a unique entry on this list, and not too many games do the remake route where they are so drastically unfaithful to the original game that some people are upset, but at the end of the day, the game itself is still a really good game. So yeah, Resident Evil 3 just somehow managed to claim that title here. Now, in videos like this, I want to do a better job at kind of explaining where our actual experiences with the games lie before we start talking about like the general consensus and the general understanding. Sometimes in the past on this channel, I feel like we do a really good job at like recapping objectively the various like voices of the gaming community, but some people feel like we're jaded or angling it in a very specific way, and that's not what we want to do. We're just having a good chat about games, and I just want to talk about The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask 3D without people immediately getting angry about this game making it onto this list. Now, I am a pretty big Legend of Zelda fan. I've played most of the mainline Legend of Zelda games. I've at least dabbled in all of the 3D games with one exception, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, which I know is wild because so many people love The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. It is like their favorite. It has its own cult following surrounding it. I don't know where, as a kid, I got this deep-rooted anxiety from about timed sections in video games that would just stress me out, and I think I still subtly have it to this day, where I'm like, man, if I am on a time limit, I just crack under the pressure. I just don't like it in games. I think that's why I could never get past the first level of Metroid Prime when I was a kid on the GameCube. But knowing how popular The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is, when they announced that they were remaking it for the 3DS, I was intrigued at the very least, because I loved Ocarina of Time, and I had played Ocarina of Time 3D on the 3DS, but Majora's Mask kind of seemed like, you know, a slam dunk to finally get to experience the game. However, when the game did release, since I wasn't like, you know, super nostalgic necessarily for Majora's Mask, I saw some reviews of people kind of debating across the board how the game was. And this is where it gets very interesting, because I never ended up actually getting around to playing Majora's Mask. I probably should. I know I should. But it opened up a very, very large discussion about remaking games in general, because Majora's Mask 3D had a lot of creative liberties added to the game that largely changed up the gameplay from the original. Now, I just want to be crystal clear here. Majora's Mask 3D is generally still looked at as a very good game. If you look at its Metacritic score, it's still very high, in the high 80s. And I think majority of the casual player base absolutely love Majora's Mask 3D, probably almost as much as the original still has its charm. But when it comes to the people who really, really loved Majora's Mask, it's their favorite game, the remake changed too much, especially in communities I think where speedrunning was big. And I think that ultimately resulted in this game still being discussed as one of the lesser good remakes of all time, just because of the fact that a lot of things were altered. A casual fan who liked Majora's Mask and played it back in the day might not notice things like some of the characters that you can play as, or the, masks where you turn into the type of character. The movement that was kind of a meta in the game was kind of changed or altered, making it not as good or fluid as some of the tricks you'd be able to do originally. Some of the dungeons were altered, some of the boss fights were changed, making them much easier. And ultimately, it seemed like a lot of the changes that were made just was too much of a shift from the package deal that the original Majora's Mask was. And that's before even going into the debate that a lot of Majora's Mask die-hard fans bring up about the change in art style and the difference in color saturation, the newer models, the way that the characters look, some feeling like the change in art kind of diminishes the eeriness, mood, and anxiety that the original Majora's Mask had, which made the game special. It is interesting seeing kind of the big differences between Majora's Mask remake versus Ocarina of Time's remake, because generally speaking, Ocarina of Time more or less does have better fan support than Majora's Mask. And it seemed like with the Ocarina of Time thing, while there are still changes, obviously, some considerations were made in keeping some of the gameplay features more faithful to the original. Even some things that were technically glitches, they kind of reprogrammed into the game because it was such a popular way of playing the game that they didn't want to remove it altogether. Majora's Mask seemed like they maybe took things a little bit too far with its creative liberties, and because of that, a portion of the community didn't like the remake. So at the same time, I'm not trying to bash Majora's Mask. I am trying to point out that sometimes a game that a casual audience might see as a good remake that, has good reviews on IGN and stuff, still has a community of people who have justified reasons for not liking what the newer version was. Fortunately, the Majora's Mask community is still pretty active. There's a lot of fan overhaul mods for Majora's Mask. And now that whole N64 source code compilation project thing, I don't really know how it exactly works, but people have reverse engineered a way to play Nintendo 64 games natively on PC, and that's pretty cool. It means that the door will open in the future for fan mods and more things to actually see, a more faithful remake of Majora's Mask, hopefully one day, get released, unless Nintendo shuts it down. So when it comes to game re-releases, historically speaking, there is this category of re-releases where it's a game coming to a different console for the first time, and usually it's just a re-release. I mean, nothing to write home about, but every once in a while, one of these re-releases is just a wild experience. And I think Dead Rising Chop Till You Drop is the perfect example of this. Now, back in the day, there was a console called the Nintendo Wii, and this console wasn't as powerful as the Xbox 360. So they decided to take Dead Rising and make a watered down version of the game that could work on the Nintendo Wii. So interestingly enough, Capcom already had released Resident Evil 4 on the Nintendo Wii, and they just took the team that had already built this engine and started working on a Dead Rising game. And this port or re-release of the original Dead Rising game, this isn't a spin-off like you would think it would be with a name Chop Till You Drop. It is the main game, but just not as good, and a couple of years late. They had to trim down on some of the features. There was a photography system in the game that ended up getting cut. The mall itself is significantly smaller. Frank, the character you play as, can't jump in the Wii version.
Wait, is that because you can't jump in Resident Evil 4?
That's what I'm getting to, because the weapons in the game, and there's a lot of firearms, are all weapons from Resident Evil 4. You'll just see guns that were straight up in Resident Evil 4. And actually, the original guns that were in Dead Rising were not in the game. They replaced them with the Resident Evil 4 guns. There were some things exclusive to the Wii version that the other version couldn't do. So, I mean, you can weigh out your pros and cons. Like on the Wii version, you could change the color of the blood. Awesome. And if you complete the main story, you got access to some mini games. Like, why not? So this game released, and I'm sure some people had fun with it. I've heard that Dead Rising Chop Till You Drop, despite the name, feels like the most shooter-focused version of the game, and that the shooting mechanics aren't the worst. But the game definitely got like mixed reviews and feedback. This was, you know, just the era of we not getting maybe the best versions of games when they were released across consoles. I mean, you could make the same argument for games like Call of Duty Black Ops, right? They had Black Ops on the Xbox 360 and PS3 and PC, and then the Wii version. And it functioned, but yeah, I mean, this was a commonplace thing. We don't need to talk about every example of a game that would get like a Wii version just like thrown out there. I thought Dead Rising was a good one to point out.
Personally, I do remember there was like a really bad Far Cry 1 port for the Wii as well. That was kind of pretty bad.
There was a Far Cry 1 port?
Yeah, I think it's called like Far Cry Vengeance or something like that.
I never knew about that.
I remember playing that over at a friend's house, and it was pretty bad as well.
Originally, back in the day, there was a game called Far Cry Instincts, but then there was Far Cry Instincts Evolution for the Xbox, and that was like a sequel to Far Cry Instincts, and then there was a Wii remake of that in 2006, which is just a lot going on, and that also, from what I'm reading here, got negative reviews. Overly compressed FMVs was one of the big complaints. Is that like rendered cutscenes, like pre-rendered cutscenes?
I guess so, yeah. I wonder what they look like.
Hold on. Let's pull it up. This is insane. This looks like worse than Nintendo DS graphics, I feel like. What is this? Oh, it's a statue. I thought it was a person. Look at 11 minutes and 50 seconds.
Oh. Oh. Okay. I
thought that was a person.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell the difference. I was like, what is this character design? Well, there's another example then.
So in 2012, Konami decided to remaster Silent Hill 2 and 3 and call it the Silent Hill HD Collection. Now, these games were obviously supposed to have updated graphics and would work on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, where the original games were for previous generations. Now, what was funny about this is that Konami lost the original source code to the finished versions of Silent Hill 2 and 3. So the studio they hired, Hyjing Studios, was provided like some early development builds, and they kind of had to figure it out from there, which obviously meant that the final product was gonna be different than the original Silent Hill 2 and 3 releases. Now, this included unfinished visuals, audio, and like even the gameplay was different in many scenarios. But the most jarring thing is actually looking at the difference in atmosphere. They apparently didn't have the code for the fog render engine or whatever from the original games, so they kind of had to come up with this solution, and it shows. Obviously, you can tell that the atmosphere is way different in the HD collection than it was originally, like way less spooky, kind of like takes away from the whole game. Users obviously rated this collection super low, and most critics didn't even rate it that high. There were some outlets that only gave it like a 3 out of 10, but IGN, they gave it a 9 out of 10. Obviously, they couldn't lose the Konami contact by rating this game poorly, I guess, at the time. What was interesting as well is that the collection included like new dialogue, so they hired some new voice actors to redo all the dialogue, but you could still play the old version with the old voice lines, and the new voice actors apparently sucked as well. I don't know, there was just a lot wrong with this, and there wasn't any key members involved, you know. They eventually would respond to this, to all this backlash, and say they're gonna fix the game, and they did fix the game a little bit. They never got the full scope of what Silent Hill 2 and 3 were originally. Then obviously we got the Silent Hill 2 remake like recently, and that one was really good, and they actually hired some original development team members to make it, so I guess they kind of made up for it. But I don't know, this was just like a weird release.
One of my favorite games on the Nintendo 64 is kind of a wild premise, but it was called Roadrash 64. Not too many people probably remember this game, but if you played the game back in the day, you know that this game was incredible. It was a part of a bigger series, but the basic premise is you drive a motorcycle in a race, but you have weapons, and you can just hit people, other racers, with the weapons as you're racing. Like on the Nintendo 64 with like those graphics back in the day, it was like an incredible concept. I don't know, every once in a while I still will play this game, and it's always been a pretty good time. Now, this series actually hasn't been around in quite some time. The last Roadrash game was called Roadrash Jailbreak, and that was released on the PlayStation 1 in 2000. So like, fans of Roadrash have been like, hey, when's the next Roadrash game coming out? Why aren't there games like Roadrash in existence. And after like nothing coming from the franchise for a long time, I guess EA, who developed the original ones and published them, didn't want to make more. Finally, fans were like, you know what? Let's take matters into our own hands. And this is where we talk about the category of reboots known as spiritual reboots. And sometimes they're not very good. Very similarly, trying to play directly onto the popularity of what Roadrash was back in the day was a game that's available on Steam called Road Rage. And it's the same exact concept. It literally looks like the modern day Roadrash 64 that fans wanted, except this game isn't good. It's messy, the physics are all over the place. There was barely any actual effort, I think, put into this. They just knew that there was a niche and people probably wanted a game like Roadrash 64. Fortunately enough, there was another person who thought, hey, let's bring this series back in a spiritual successor. You know, obviously they don't have the rights to name Roadrash, but like, what can we do? And that brought up the game Road Redemption, which was like cooking for a while, but it officially was available on Steam in 2019, 2 years after Road Rage. I haven't tried Road Redemption yet. I only found out about it when I was looking up stuff about Road Rage because I had known about that game and I knew to avoid it because the Steam reviews were rough. And Road Redemption actually does look promising. It has a lot of positive reviews on Steam. So I think I need to give it a try probably. But yeah, interesting how two games, both trying to be a spiritual successor, had drastically different outcomes. And also, while I was looking into this, the studio that did Road Redemption, the good one, announced their next game, which is called Kingmakers, and they had like a GIF on the Steam store showing off gameplay of their new game. And it just looks like a wild concept. It's like medieval, maybe like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 era, except like the player has an AK-47 and is at war. You see that?
Yeah, that looks slitty, dude. When is that coming out?
I don't know. Okay, Kingmakers is the name of that game.
Yeah, I want to play that, dude. There's like a wet dream, dude. You get a time machine, you go back to the medieval times with your AK, and you just like become like a wizard.
Wait, it's planned to release Q1 2025? That's like right now. Almost right now, right? We have like, doesn't Q1 start like in March?
You know, if we had an accountant for Rocket Sloth, I bet we would know because we'd have a meeting with him.
We would know how the queues work. This is insane. I hope it's good. Online co-op. They are cooking.
Wait, did you see the motorbike?
They brought the motorbike?
You can ride around the motorbike and just shoot. Bah, 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 bah.
They're building off of Road Redemption, I guess, also. Maybe they're in the same universe. We'll go rapid fire through a few that we don't want to spend a lot of time on, but we can talk about. Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. We've talked about this one in a few videos, I feel like. It was not a polished remake. It was just a copy and paste of the original code. There were some like chibi assets thrown in there. A lot of content that was in Pokemon Platinum was just ignored altogether in the remake for the Switch. There was like bugs in the game. There were people discovering glitches in the old-fashioned original game that were only discovered or uncovered by people playing the new game because it literally was a copy and paste of the code. It was an arc. It was just not the best, most polished thing. A casual fan probably would enjoy Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. I liked it, but it was a downgrade from Platinum, which is the weird thing.
Right. I mean, it was fine, but like honestly, from Pokemon remakes, we're like used to better.
Right. The standard was higher. Also, I think there is like a fan mod that Nintendo hasn't shut down yet, where they restored some of the Platinum content. Supposedly pretty cool. Also, on the subject of Pokemon, the Let's Go games, Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Let's Go Pikachu, those are obviously remakes of, I guess, Pokemon Yellow from back in the day. I don't know. I just really did not like these games. I didn't like the whole way that they merged Pokemon Go into it just because of the popularity of it, and the whole catching mechanics of Pokemon was different. The game was way too easy. Like, they really had just like lowered the bar. Yeah, I wasn't a fan of that one. And it's disappointing because I would have been down for remakes if they would have just done it more akin to what they had with Fire Red and Leaf Green.
Oh yeah, those were also really good.
Yeah, no, Fire Red, Leaf Green, awesome. Let's Go, I don't know.
Also the Ruby Sapphire and Omega Alpha, or whatever. I don't even know what they're called.
Mega Ruby Sapphire Omega Alpha.
Okay, whatever. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, those are okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I like.
Yeah, they're good. Yeah. So another one that I didn't know about until more recently. Someone did a really good video on it. We'll put the video thumbnail on the screen here and the name of the channel. But Sonic Adventure is a really polarizing game because like it's a good Sonic game, but man, it is buggy. There's a lot of things going on there. And I experienced the game for the first time on the GameCube, as I feel like a lot of people experienced Sonic Adventure. And while it's still a good game, what I never realized was that a lot of the issues that Sonic Adventure has with it being kind of a buggy mess, the controls are kind of all over the place, actually stem from the port to the GameCube, and that the Sega Dreamcast version, the original version where the game launched a couple of years earlier, actually is a pretty polished experience. So a lot of the criticisms that Sonic Adventure would get actually stem from just a bad port, and not necessarily the core game itself. Not to say that Sonic's credibility with not buggy experiences would be high if Sonic Adventure hadn't had a bad port. Yeah, it is interesting to me that the original Dreamcast version is probably the definitive way to play the game, if it was between that or the GameCube version. Or I think there was a really old PC version too. Nobody talks about that version. And then also Sonic Adventure 2, I think the GameCube version of Sonic Adventure 2 was a better port. It seemed more faithful to the original, but there were some weird things taken out, like minor Easter eggs and stuff. For whatever reason, they just removed them, like Big the Cat running in the background. Diddy Kong Racing, another amazing game for the Nintendo 64 that I loved back in the day. They did do a DS version of the game, and the DS version of the game just wasn't all there. It wasn't bad, but it just didn't have that same fullness maybe that the original had. There were some just weird decisions made. It's not like a major point on this list, but I still wanted to at least give it a mention just because I think the original Diddy Kong Racing was better, and the remake came out years later for the DS. Tony Hawk HD, not the remake from a couple of years ago, but there was this arcade game released on the Xbox 360 that I actually played quite a bit of, and a lot of people hate this game. They're like, this is one of the worst Tony Hawk games ever. I did kind of enjoy it, but I was well aware back in the day that for some HD game that they're like, we're bringing back these locations and we're doing this. It wasn't a remake of what the original Tony Hawk games were, which is what people thought the experience it was. They thought we were getting something more akin to the Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 remake that we actually would get years later. And this was just like a little throwaway arcade game. It was fine, but it also wasn't the best Tony Hawk game. But for a discounted arcade game price, I kind of had fun with it. But yeah, they could have done better for sure. Let me just talk about ZombiU.
Yeah. Your favorite game of all time.
Yeah. It's just a short
ZombiU
hurdle.
is your favorite game of all time.
It's not my favorite game of all time.
ZombiU,
I just thought ZombiU wasn't the worst game ever. That's it. I thought, hey, it's cool. It's a zombie game that's not super fast paced. You have to treat it slow, methodical, like you're in an episode of The Walking Dead. You know, you don't just have guns like Left 4 Dead and you shoot everything. You have to like hit them with the cricket bat.
Yeah, see how much you love it? You're so passionate about it.
It's an okay game. I don't love it. It had flaws, but it was... Zombie is a weird one because we still don't know if it counts as a reboot. I think Ubisoft's first ever game was called Zombie, with just an I, no E at the end. And there's ZombiU, which came out on the Wii U. And then when they would later port the game to Xbox One and PlayStation 4, they dropped the U and just called it Zombie again. So it's the first time they used the name. Now, we've learned online that during development, it doesn't seem like the game was like internally known as Zombie until the very end. So it could have just been like this marketing thing real quick to try to be like, look, Ubisoft is going to their roots, whatever that means. And they called it ZombiU.
Or maybe it was cheaper.
Maybe they've been renewing the trademark for years and they were like, oh, let's just go with it. There's a couple of beat 'em ups that are probably worth mentioning here. Turtles in Time Reshelled. People really didn't like that game. They just felt like it strayed too far. I was always more frustrated with the Battletoads remake, not for probably the reasons that you'd think I would be, considering some of the games that we talked about here, but Battletoads didn't have online play. It has local co-op, but how are you going to release a game that is co-op that you're supposed to play with friends and not have online in it? This drives me nuts. Like, it is my biggest pet peeve when games have multiplayer functionality advertised as like a main point of the game, and then they don't let you play online, like because they don't want to program it in. It's insane.
I still remember it was a dark night. You, me, and them all downloaded the game. We booted up just to find out it doesn't have online co-op.
We're like, how do we invite each other? Actually, another similar experience that's not a reboot, but the new Power Ranger game. I was really excited about that. I got my friend to buy the game. Luke, you and I game shares, so you had it also. We go to play it, and there's some weird way that their online works. You can play with up to 6 people at the same time. But there's a limit to only 2 Xboxes. You can do 3 people on one Xbox, or 3 people on the other, or 4 people on one Xbox and 2 people on the other Xbox, but you can't connect beyond just 2 Xboxes. And that also is just a crazy choice that they made. I'm still upset about that one too. I haven't even played it yet.
I still have the game installed.
We'll have to play it. We'll just have to ditch Tails and play it without him.
Like he ditched us for Supermarket Together.
Dude, don't even get me started.
I have something on my list that I personally was pretty excited for when it announced, and that is the Grand Theft Auto, the Trilogy, the Definitive Edition. And this whole thing was just a straight up fumble, in my opinion. The quality was not on the level you would expect from a GTA game or a Rockstar game even. You know, Rockstar makes pretty good games. All their releases are pretty fire as far as I'm concerned. But this one was just like a buggy mess. The textures didn't look right. The character models were like a downgrade. And, you know, I looked into it, which I'd never done before, who actually made this, because Rockstar obviously didn't make this himself. They outsourced it to Grove Street Games, which is the studio responsible for the iOS and Android ports of the GTA games. Like they ported GTA Chinatown Wars, you know, all these GTA games and even San Andreas and stuff to iOS and Android. But they never really made a game. They only just did iOS ports. And then they were tasked with making this big remaster. So I guess they were not very well equipped to do the job. And on top of that, Rockstar removed the original versions from all the storefronts. So if you wanted to play San Andreas Vice City or 3, you had to buy this definitive edition if you didn't own it before. And yeah, it's pretty disappointing. Now, obviously, they did do some patches and some bug fixes. And nowadays, it's not as bad as it was at launch, but it still could be better even nowadays. Then, do you remember the Thief game? I think you played it a couple years ago. I remember you streamed it to me.
I think you actually were over at my house.
Oh, it was over at your house? Even better.
I wanted to see what it was like.
Yeah, and what was it like?
It wasn't very good.
It wasn't very good.
Luke tried to warn me about it, saying that it wasn't a good game, but I was like, how bad can it be? Maybe it's like thievery mechanics from Skyrim or something. And it was just kind of a rough game around the edges. I thought it was going to be like maybe an older version of Dishonored.
The original games were probably closer to Dishonored than this Thief reboot was, because the original games, you know, they focused on stealth. They had like a decent story, you know, they were pretty beloved. I think the first one is even like really highly rated, like a 9 out of 10 game on like Metacritic and stuff. The studio went under in like 2004, so they stopped making games. Like they were closed by Eidos Interactive. And then in 2009, Square Enix bought the rights to the Thief franchise and then decided to reboot the series. And as Elijah said, this reboot sucked. Everything that made the original good was missing. Like there wasn't any focus on stealth. Did you feel like the game made you like want to be stealthy or anything?
No, I more felt like I wanted to parkour my way through it after like 2 minutes of trying to be stealthy.
Right, which is another criticism, that this game was linear, like very linear. There was like no real approach, or there wasn't like any different ways you could approach situations like the original games. There was just like this one way you're supposed to go. And I remember you were stuck under a bridge in the water or something, and you couldn't cross unless you took a guard out. You tried, like, I remember watching you, and you tried doing like different things, but it kept like game overing you because you weren't doing what the game wanted you to do, which is pretty insane for a game that's supposed to be all about like, you know, freedom and stealth.
I feel like I've blocked out most memories about this game.
You're probably better off blocking out anything about this. Now, they also changed the art direction, which is also a weird thing to do for a reboot. You know, we've seen it with other reboots, or we've seen it with other sequels, like Halo 4, where they randomly change the art direction. I think it never works out.
Actually, now that you bring up the art direction change, I almost want to say I feel like this game came out in 2014. I definitely could see this game being a direct response to Dishonored's success, because Dishonored came out 2 years earlier, I think, or maybe a year and a half earlier, or something like that. 2 years earlier. It wouldn't surprise me if they threw something together. It couldn't have taken them long to make this game. There's no way it took them a long time. Yeah, I don't know. It was just a weird experience. It did launch in the early days, like right after the Xbox One and PS4 released. So I think I remember people buying the game just because there was no other games to play on the next gen consoles.
But that couldn't have been enough people, because we've never seen a sequel. Even though they themselves said, and I'm quoting this, right? They said, "We've built a really big universe around the first game," referring to the Thief reboot, "and there's a lot of layers to it. The world is really deep. So there's a lot of possibilities to jump to." This is their reply when they were asked pre-release if they're gonna make a Thief 2. So obviously they had some plans, or they had some hopes to make another Thief game. They were trying to cook something. And obviously what they cooked was it was cooked.
Sonic Generations is a little bit interesting. This game was remade recently with a Shadow the Hedgehog section of the game added in, where there's a ton of levels from Shadow the Hedgehog's past. They probably did it to tie into the new movie that had come out around the same time, which introduced Shadow the Hedgehog. And they were just like, you know what? Just throw Sonic Generations out there. Let's give it a little bit of some paint and something, and we'll put a Shadow story instead of just like making a new game. I feel like it's so hard for Sega to make a good Sonic game. Sonic Generations, though, isn't bad. Actually, the Shadow episode thing is pretty well received. The weird thing about it is that itself, because they also decided to make minor, insignificant changes that you wouldn't expect and that you wouldn't notice unless you're really, really paying attention to things like cutscenes, like just changing out dialogue, trying to like rewrite some of the story of Sonic Generations. I don't know why, but they would just like take these random things and change it. And sometimes it completely changed the dynamic of a cutscene or an interaction, or it would like remove a joke or something. I think it's a good game. It's cool that they made it, whatever. You can enjoy it. It's probably, if you're a big Sonic fan, worth the price of like $60, $70, whatever it is. But it is weird. Like that little thing, the little tweaks they made are just a little weird. A game I didn't expect to be as bad as what it was when I actually looked at it was House of the Dead Remake for Nintendo Switch. It's just not up to standards for what a game remake should be. If you watch 5 seconds of gameplay, it literally looks like an iPhone game from 2011, maybe? I don't know. That might be too generous. But I'm really, really surprised that this was the level of detail that they put in and called it good and then released the game. House of the Dead was an awesome game back in the day. For an arcade shooter. I don't know what this is. I'm very disappointed. I just refuse to play this game because of the way that it looks, and it's just upsetting. So I don't know. Let's just go to the next one. Okay, now when it comes to other games that are being rebooted or coming back from a long hiatus, maybe they'll learn from the past, or maybe they'll be worse. There are a couple of games that are already announced that I'm a little bit worried about. One of those being Perfect Dark, which I've talked about Perfect Dark before, so we don't need to like dive into it. I'm a huge Perfect Dark fan of the original N64 version. It's like James Bond, but a female character, slightly in the future, and then aliens like halfway through, right? Really cool concept. My biggest issue is just a regular complaint about Microsoft Game Studios, specifically with Halo Infinite. Remember how there was all this backlash and controversy about how the split screen mode with Halo was like not there? Perfect Dark, the original one on the N64, was able to have split screen campaign co-op. One of the first games to do a first-person shooter campaign co-op in that form. Before Halo Eve. Perfect Dark Zero, the game that people don't really consider as good, that released on the Xbox 360 as a launch title, had co-op, campaign, split screen, or online, and it was functioning.
Also, didn't the 360 re-release of the first one have online co-op as well?
Yeah, and that's not even, they like took the source code of the game and they ran it through a whole new engine, and it still had co-op, and they added online co-op. So they like added more than they even had to do. You know, Battletoads couldn't do that, but they did it.
Bro, I'm still upset about the Battletoads.
I'm still mad about it.
It's been 5 years.
But the new Perfect Dark game's already been announced to be a single player experience. And this is why Halo fans are upset, because they're not giving us the basic features that were staples in previous games in favor of whatever they're trying to do in the new game. And I just feel like Perfect Dark is another game that's best played with friends. And finally, we're getting something after development hell, after years of nothing, and they obviously have people who've never experienced Perfect Dark the right way working on it then, because if it doesn't have co-op, then what's the point? I mean, it's just going to be another generic stealth shooter, stealth spy game that is in first person. I mean, there's better ones out there. I'm telling you now, the new Perfect Dark game, I really don't think it's going to be good. It's going to come down to, is this game okay or bad? I don't think it's going to be like like earth-shattering, groundbreaking experience of a game. It's going to be another passable Game Pass day one game like we've been seeing lately, like games like Avowed, where it's like, yeah, it's fun, it's a good time, it's free on Game Pass. And then, but like, it's not the new Skyrim, it's not the next Skyrim, and it's the same thing. It's why Halo Infinite wasn't the next Halo 3, right? It's just, they just trim out the things that are incredible and leave you with like something that kind of feels like a cool experience, but not quite.
It's gonna even get worse if they go ahead and do that AI thing they've been talking about, you know?
Yeah, what was it that Microsoft said about AI stuff?
So they have this AI that generates like the game as you play it or something, like a full game, and they said they're gonna start using it to make games or something. I don't know. Also, they're gonna train it on their mediocre games. Like, they're gonna train it on the games that people already consider underwhelming. So like, dude,
just wait till we get to play Halo Infinite 2, made by AI based on Halo Infinite 1. Also, did you see the comment someone left on our last video about how we're finally talking about 343 Industries and Halo Infinite not being the best?
Dude.
I was like, where have you been?
This guy's like... Those guys, like, they finally broke their silence.
Yeah, we got backlash before Halo Infinite came out when we said, man, I'm kind of worried. It doesn't look like there's a lot of content in this game. And people were so mad at us.
Yeah, and hey, look at what happened. You know, there wasn't a lot of content in the game when it came out.
Fable, another one that I think is going to fall right into the same category of mediocre. The game will get above a 5 out of 10. But not above like an 8 out of 10, an 8 or higher. That's just how I feel like with most Microsoft Game Studio games. I think Fable will be like a 7 out of 10 game, 7.5 out of 10 game.
I mean, it's another Microsoft game, you know what I mean? Like they everything they touch just turns into mediocre.
I love the fact that there were rumors circulating around when the game was in obvious development hell. I mean, it's been years since they announced the game, that the studio that's working on the game is the same studio that did Forza Horizon, right? I always thought that was an interesting choice, but then there were rumors that the game development side was struggling because the studio knows how to make racing games but have never worked on an RPG before. And that makes sense to me. I bet you the world will look beautiful. I don't know how it's going to function as an RPG.
Yeah, or the world will feel like a racetrack, like a big racetrack, you know?
Everybody just plays the horse minigame that has way too much depth to it for some reason, like this whole side mini game that's like way deeper than everything else.
They already did that kind of with the Fable Connect game. They had like this horse racing or this horse riding mechanic. It was like pretty weird.
Let's go back, dude.
No, let's not go back. Let's just like go into the future if we get a time machine. Let's go further away from it.
There's a couple of other little ones we don't need to spend too much time on. Marathon is Bungie's new game. That's great because they're not spread thin already with the state of Destiny 2. There's also like some Gooner shit going on possibly behind the scenes during the development of the game. That's a whole arc. The game is already announced to not be anything like the first Marathon games, which was probably closer to Halo. It was like Halo before Halo was a thing. And I don't know. It's going to be another extraction shooter, like, but sci-fi and made by Bungie. So I don't know.
It's just like Tarkov is like a niche product that works within its niche setting, and they struggle with their like fans too, right? But all these studios trying to copy it, they just can't reach this level of this like random Russian developer. I don't know what's going on, you know what I mean?
It's almost like a lot of the studios or publishers are scared of missing out on the next thing. Like when Battle Royales blew up, right? Every developer was trying to get on it as quickly as possible. And like, if you weren't there right away, you were missing out. Like Fortnite was super successful because it was like right in there within the first year of like PUBG and H1Z1 being the main Battle Royale games. I mean, the Call of Duty stuff, like they were trying to do it, but you know, they did the whole free to play thing. They had an uphill battle within their own right and they were able to do something, but we saw a lot of Battle Royales come and fail. And I think because of that, they're like, we need to make sure we capitalize on the next thing. And I wonder if they just wrongfully thought that extraction shooters were the next thing. And they were just, a lot of studios were going all in on extraction style stuff. Even Call of Duty.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, DMC was so weak, so watered down of an experience. But what you say, it makes a lot of sense. And I feel like they don't realize that it just makes, like, if they just keep releasing games that hop on the next trend, it just makes, like, it seem like they just pump out games for the sake of pumping out games without, like, any passion or any vision. You know what I mean? So, like, they dilute their whole, like, you know, backlog or, like, the whole, like, release. And then if they make a good game, you know, it probably isn't that well received either, or like it's diluted by like all the resources they have to spend on hopping on the next trend. So it's just like, it's bad. I don't know. We saw it with Halo, right? Like when Halo started chasing Call of Duty, like it fell off. Yeah.
All the way back in the Halo 4 days. And now I remember when people were like, oh yeah, the Halo Battle Royale. Like 343 could develop a Battle Royale if they tried to.
They took a year to put the co-op that people like modded into the game day one. Like, you know what I mean? How is this studio still open?
I never understand how 2001 games, Perfect Dark and Halo, Perfect Dark is 2000, Halo 2001, they had split screen on a Nintendo 64 and an original Xbox. What happened? Call of Duty is interesting because they did capitalize on the Battle Royale. They did the whole DMZ thing to try to capitalize on extraction shooters. But don't forget, the third dark horse of the race of the apocalypse. What is the right term for that? I don't know.
Isn't it 4 horses of the apocalypse?
And then like a dark horse in a race. Maybe I got the two sayings and combined them.
Yeah, I think there's something mixed up here.
They did an Among Us game type in Black Ops Cold War.
It did?
Because Among Us was really popular in like what, 2020, and they like hired on Activision, I want to say it was Activision Shanghai, or as a development studio in China, to make a full-on Among Us type game mode. Fortnite had it also. I don't know. I always thought that was like a weird use of resources. I definitely think Call of Duty thought that would be the next big thing, and they went all in on it. It wasn't, but it was something that existed. But I think we're getting a little off topic now. But I just wanted to bring that up because we're talking about I don't even remember.
Trend chasing.
Trend chasing.
But like, honestly, with Call of Duty, it's fine. They're such a massive operation, they can afford it, right? But like, why are all these studios that don't make any good games on a regular basis trying to chase these trends? I just don't understand it.
I guess you're right. Call of Duty has the money to like do random stuff like that because, I mean, look how massive they are.
I mean, that's good. They should reinvest into their franchise.
They can fail on the little side quests, and the whole franchise doesn't go under. Halo Infinite sorry, we went back to Halo. With Halo Infinite, they put out a new Halo game like every 6 or 7 years. You know what I mean? It's taken forever. I mean, how many years has it been already? 4 years since Halo Infinite came out?
Yeah, 4 years.
We have to wait years for another Halo game to come out. And when a game does come out, it's missing like core features. It's ridiculous.
Right, and like it's been 4 years. Sorry, I have to say this about Halo Infinite. Dude. This one guy's got to be really happy that we're talking about Halo Infinite and 343 again. But it's been 4 years. They're maybe gonna announce a new Halo in like the next 2 or 3 years, right? Or 1 to 3 years. Like let's see, it's that range, right? And then it's gonna take another 5 years before the game actually comes out because I don't think the studio has enough staff right now to make a game in like the next 2 or 3 years.
I don't know if they know how to make a game.
I mean, besides that, even if they wanted to, they didn't have anyone. They fired everyone.
At the end of the day, too many people forget 343 Industries or Halo Studios, whatever they're called now, is just Microsoft. It is an office at Microsoft. The executives at Microsoft always will have the control, say, and influence on what happens. And they're the ones that greenlight the projects. It's the same thing. I know people think it's a new studio. It's not.
It's just propaganda.
I just think that 343 always was an outsource studio where they would outsource work to contractors, other development studios, and they just have been the managers of Halo. They haven't actually made anything. Or if they do, it's in these confined spaces. Look into the development of Halo 4, look into the development of Halo 5. Halo 4 is easy. The multiplayer, all the maps are made by another studio. It's just the same thing over and over again. It never changes. The mission never changes.
Also, I will never call them Halo Studios, dude. That's the only time that naming is okay. Calling it 343.
Okay, there's a couple of other interesting things we don't need to go as deep into. Apparently, this is in our notes from way back when we first came up with this idea, but there's a crazy Taxi MMO game coming out. Is that real?
Yeah, I think that is. I mean, let's be real. We don't know much about it, but there's something with crazy taxi happening. Reboot, style. Like, yeah.
Okay, Yooka-Replaylee was announced. Is that out yet? It's a Yooka-Laylee remake, which is weird because Yooka-Laylee came out, what, like 2017, 18?
Yeah, they must have smoked the same pack that like the Last of Us developer was smoking with this re-release. You know, and game just came out, they're already re-releasing it, remastering it. Like this is like a modern game. What are they on?
Just doing. It is weird that they don't just do an update to bring the game up to standards, but I guess they can resell it if they do a replayly. And then we have in the notes here Resident Evil 5 rumors.
I mean, yeah, they remade 2, 3, and 4. You know, and obviously there will be rumors that they're gonna remake Resident Evil 5. And I hope to God they don't do it. I don't know, Resident Evil 5 wasn't that good.
But what if they make it good? Like, what if they're like, this is Resident Evil 5, but good edition?
I mean, sure, if they make it good, I'll accept it.
They should just redo Resident Evil 1 and 0 also.
Right, and there's like other ones. There's like Veronica Chronicles, that's pretty good. There's like some spin-offs they could remake first before they should remake 5. And then if they remake 5 and they're also going to remake 6, how are they going to salvage 6? At least 5? You know, it still feels like a Resident Evil game, but 6 is like, I don't know, it feels like some like Tom Cruise fever dream. Like, I don't know how to explain it. It's like Mission Impossible had like a child with Resident Evil. I don't know what's going on there. They literally ripped off that snowmobile mission from Modern Warfare 2.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it's just crazy. But we should play it sometime. It's cool.
I think Resident Evil Revelations 2 is co-op. I don't know if it still is, but if we can play it, but we should try that also.
Also, another Resident Evil they should remake first. Oh, like Revelations 1 and 2. Like, those are better than 5 or 6.
That's it. That's on our list.
You know, there's one more thing. Are we still getting the Prince of Persia remake? Is that still happening? I remember we talked about it before, but I kind of forgot what's going on.
Didn't they show something and then they're like, actually, we're not going to release this? And then they were like, but we're going to make it?
Yeah, they canceled pre-orders or something, but they were like, yeah, we're still making it. It's just later than we thought. I don't know. It's a pretty bizarre situation, but I don't even know why that's happening, honestly, but hey.
Okay, let's palate cleanse. What are the best remakes?
There's like 2 or 3 that come to my mind. Obviously, we talked about Fire Leaf and... or Fire Red and Leaf Green or whatever. Those were really good. When I played those were probably one of the first remakes I ever played as a kid. But I did really enjoy Resident Evil 2's remake. I thought that was really, really great. So those 2 came to mind. And then Black Mesa, also really good. The Half-Life 1 remake.
Did that start as a fan project?
It started as a mod, yeah. And then they somehow got the rights. I don't know all the legality, but... You know, that evolved into its own thing, and that game is really, really good as well.
I think more recently, Persona 3 Reloaded, or Reload, whatever it's called. I think that game was really well done for taking the old content and just modernizing the game a bunch. Call of Duty 4 Remastered, the campaign side at least, maybe not the multiplayer. But the campaign side, I thought it was pretty neat.
Did you play the Mafia remasters too?
Oh yeah, I did play Mafia 1. Mafia 1 was remade completely, and that one was good. It was good, definitely. Your vehicle isn't very, very slow like you remember. They have like a toggle where you can drive it like historically accurate mode, or the game is at least still kind of fun mode.
That was some scuff way back in the day having to.
Yeah, they didn't have the toggle back in the day, so I know you had this like hatred about the original Mafia game.
Well, yeah, also the game soft locked at the church mission, and I could never beat it, so that was also one.
Was that Mafia 2 though?
Was it 2? I don't know. Maybe it's 1 or 2? I don't know.
I can't remember. It's been a couple years since I played. I thought that was Mafia 2, but
maybe it's 2. But there was definitely something where the game soft locked. I could never beat it.
This is a wild ride of a video. We tried to do a little bit of a different format for a longer form video, so if you don't mind us talking back and forth, or if you do mind, let us know in the comments what style of the video you prefer, and we can kind of pave our way. I still want to do both no matter what, but how do we balance it out? Let us know. Huge shout out to our patrons and YouTube members for supporting these videos. You guys are the best. If you guys want to join and become a member or Patreon, or our patron, or a patron of our Patreon, there's a link in the description down below. You'll get your name on the credits here, which is cool. We could really use a couple more pledges, you know what I mean? But anyways, thanks so much for watching, guys. Oh, my move goal was achieved from rocking back and forth and talking.
All right.
I think that's it. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you guys next time with a new video.
Goodbye.